Okay, I've been doing a lot of yada-yada-ing, posting them on YouTube, groping basically. And the only thing I got out of it that was anything solid was the idea that the grounding rods are going to a magnetic field, which means that they are another magnetic keeper in addition to the magnetic keeper, the two magnetic keepers in Clarence's replication. The Earth is another magnetic keeper because the Earth is hollow. It does have a solid core, but for the most part it's hollow with a lot of empty space surrounding the core on the interior of the shell of the Earth. And each grounding rod constitutes about the equivalence of 1/2 turn of any particular coil. So the 4 grounding rods in the middle represent, let's go in here, represent 2 turns, just like we have up here, 2.5 turns. You know, we have 3 of them up here. So we have a 4th instance down here, and then the so-called 56 grounding rods, cut them in half, or divide in half. Well, he had wished he had done either 60 or 80. Let's say it was 100, or so that then we'd have 50 turns, 25 on each side. Where's my pointer? 25 here and 25 here. And as far as direction of winding, your guess is as good as mine. It probably has to do with which hemisphere we're on, the northern or the southern hemisphere, because he's already got, where's my pointer again? He's already got counterclockwise on the secondary here, and clockwise on the primary, and counterclockwise on the Captor loop. So I'm guessing counterclockwise on the 50 turns, and clockwise on the middle 2.5 turns. In any case, what this does is it translates this device to its appropriate concept, which is that we have 3 magnetic keepers, and the one that is of infinite size or indeterminate size or mass, indeterminate mass, is represented by the grounding rods, while the toroids in the system here are fixed, and they are powered by plug number 2 from the pure sine wave inverter of Clarence's replication. Now, what this does is it frees us to implement this overall circuit design parameter concept, whatever you want to call it, to all kinds of possibilities. In other words, instead of the Earth, we can use a mass of iron, the hull of a U-boat during the Nazi era, you know, the electro U-boats that William Lyne talked about. It could, and then so the mass of iron, when you add more iron to this magnetic keeper, you end up with a reservoir that you can store and retrieve magnetic force, which Donald Smith said was equivalent to amperage, and not just store but translate. This is important because, let's zoom in here. Let's go in further. Okay. The neon bulb is a disruptive discharge spark gap, and it's going to implement that disruptive discharge into all kinds of areas of the circuitry, not the primaries on the 2 toroids, but everything else, including this magnetic keeper down here. And the whole point of magnetism is to transform radiant energy into something usable, electromagnetic energy that we can then power a load with over here, or the battery charger over there. So the purpose of the neon bulb is to create a disruptive discharge within this line up here, which shunts over to the electric keeper here, which inductively affects this magnetic keeper down here, and also these 2 over there. So we have 3 magnetic keepers that are toroidal in shape, that are going to implement transformation of radiant energy into electromagnetic energy, and the transformation here is mostly going to power the interior of the circuit in here, while the transformation here will give us more energy to power the load, usable energy. So the neon bulb is very important because it counterbalances, counterpoises what we do down here when we ground to the earth. But this is translatable into a mass of iron because Clarence said that the geomagnetic force in the location in which we are implementing these grounding rods has to be very high, or else we're going to be sticking a lot of rods in the ground, each one 3 feet apart from the other. And it's going to be a nightmare pounding that many grounding rods. It could be several hundred if we have a very weak magnetic field in our vicinity. Who knows? Or it might be 10 or 20 surrounding 4 in the center. You know, it could be, it varies. You know, mileage varies in people's experience. But if we want to decouple this from the Earth and do an equivalent analogy to various analogous circuits that might be applicably similar to this Barbosa and Leal circuit, namely Tesla's special generator, which he might possibly have used inside his 1931 Pierce Aero car, because the Pierce Aero car is a luxury car. It's huge. And it's not made of aluminum in its chassis. It's iron. So that's a huge common ground to make use of. And the antenna would be connected to the disruptive discharge device, whatever he had up here, creating a spark gap. This could also be the hull of a U-boat. And what else? We'll leave it at that, because those are the analogies that are most equivalent. Nathan Stubblefield's Earth Collector doesn't quite match what Clarence did, or what, but it does sort of match what Barbosa and Leal did. But it is analogous. It's just a bit of more, excuse me, a bit more of a deviation. So I'm not going to dwell on it, even though it's pertinent, because it's very natural. It makes use of no sine wave inverter, no battery, no smart charger. It's totally natural, using total Earth energy, and so in terms of ergonomics, that's actually the ideal. It's just, I'm not quite sure, and I didn't do a diagram, so I won't discuss it right now, because there are a few points that are distinctly different about Nathan Stubblefield's system as opposed to Barbosa and Leal's, or Clarence's replication of Barbosa and Leal is maybe the better way to say this. But I think that's the best I can come up with, because it's obvious to me that, see, I kept thinking, let's zoom in, I kept thinking that Clarence's grounding rods were creating an electrostatic field in the midst of the Earth, which has to be a strong geomagnetic field in order to run this system efficiently. And when I think about it, just think about wire. This is insulated wire, which means it has a capacitive relationship with an iron toroid, if we imagine the hollow earth as an iron toroid. So that already qualifies as an electrostatic field of grounding rods. And also notice that the grounding rods are vertical. They're all vertical. And that means that we're collecting energy that's traversing the surface of the Earth, going around tangential to the center. Not energy coming from the center, but energy going parallel to the horizon. And that means we have to have our grounding rods in a vertical position to catch that energy at a perpendicular to the grounding rods, because the energy is perpendicular to the vertical, which means they're horizontal. And that equates to the turns on a toroid, or on anything for that matter, even these turns up here on this wire. Because when we wind a wire, we're winding the wire at a perpendicular to the form that we're winding it on. And that complies with what Michael Faraday discovered when he moves a wire within a field. The wire has to be perpendicular to what it's moving in relationship to catch a movement, to cause movement of electricity in the wire, to create a voltage potential in the wire. So the turns on a toroid are equivalent to grounding rods set in a direction that's radial to the center of the Earth, and thus perpendicular to the tangent of the Earth. In other words, perpendicular to the horizon of the Earth. And that equates as turns or coils winding on a toroid. So we're doing the same thing here that we're doing up here. We're just doing it on a much more massive iron. And Tesla said for every 200 pounds of iron added to the system somewhere within the system, it adds 1 horsepower output. So wouldn't you think that we could replace the Earth grounding rod system with a humongous mass of iron, several tons of iron? That these, instead of grounding rods, we have windings connecting it to that mass of iron? You know, like the hull of a U-boat, you know. I'm pretty certain that Barbosa and Leal have successfully demonstrated the equivalence between their system and Tesla's special generator, and thus have solved the riddle of William Lyne in his story of the Nazi conversion of U-boats into electro U-boats, because the only difference is that the primary coils powered by the inverter would be replaced by reciprocating pistons run by compressed air in the Nazi U-boat version. And the grounding rods of the Earth are windings that couple to the hull of the ship. So we have the hull of the ship separate from these toroids in here. See, this was my mistake, was oversimplifying how the Nazi U-boat furnished its power if it ran on a special generator. And I also had overlooked the possibility of creating an endless loop of wire, this secondary in here. This is coiled back upon itself. You know, and all these other things, the shunt here, the voltage shunt, and the Captor loop there. I mean, this is all, you know, so unique. I could never have possibly imagined any of this without Barbosa and Leal literally giving it to us on a silver platter, so to speak. And then it makes sense, because there's not enough information in William Lyne's story to tell us what the Tesla special generator is, unless we ever get to see one of the patents of Tesla that are quarantined, so to speak, as national security, because we know there's many more patents issued by the Patent Office that we don't get to see of Nikola Tesla. We only get to see the ones that are deemed safe for public view. So we don't know. So all we can do is speculate, and so I need input from other sources outside the domain, the limited domain of William Lyne's story, to try to figure out Nikola Tesla's special generator. And what role aluminum, copper, and metal or iron plays, magnetizable metal plays, is ancillary. It's extra. To improve efficiency, and doesn't really say much, unfortunately. Yes, unfortunately. So we have to use our imagination, and then we'll always wonder, because we'll never know for sure unless we see that secret patent. So in the meantime, to cobble together an imaginary tale of what that special generator is, this is my attempt to do so. And I practically stumbled across this Barbosa and Leal while looking at Patrick Kelly's appendix number 3, I think it is, from his website on free energy. And then it just was very inspiring because it looked very promising. And only now can I feel comfortable in substituting the grounding rods with a magnetic keeper of its own, in addition to the 2 that are up here, because it's massive. It allows for the satisfaction of that 200 pounds of iron versus 1 horsepower output. It allows for satisfaction of that quote, and it allows for the possibility of taking this system and making it mobile, such as a U-boat, which is the other criteria that has to be satisfied in trying to apply Barbosa and Leal to Tesla's special generator. And then a little extra for the ride comes along. It satisfies possibly Tesla's Pierce Arrow 1931 demonstration. Because of the massive size. If you look online for pictures of the Pierce Arrow car, it's huge. It's no little clunker. That thing is going to have so much iron in its chassis, it's unbelievable. And the only modification would be a few. The battery that's normally grounded to the chassis, I'm not so sure we can get away with having that grounded to the chassis anymore. And the antenna that usually works the radio is now going to be hooked up to the disruptive discharge spark gap. But otherwise, that's it. You know, it's unless the antenna is not sufficient surface area, in which case we keep the radio connected to the antenna and instead put a plate on the back end of the car like Clarence had suggested, and that's connected to the neon bulb in this instance, in this example. So that's the best I can do, and I guess it's, you know, my little contribution to trying to understand this, which doesn't really contribute a whole lot, but hey, you know, how much can anybody contribute? I don't know. Maybe Clarence can contribute a lot more if he was more open, but my openness is based on my stupidity, my naivete, my ignorance. I'm willing to be so open because I know so little. And that kind of eggs me on. Okay, now, what more can I make improvements on that I haven't tried to already? And most of which is groping. But I think that's why I've done a diagram. This is the first time I've actually done something that's not groping. Or the second time. The neon bulb was the first, but I didn't come up with that. That's pretty much derived from all of the hints that Clarence has dropped on energetic form that I didn't have to dig anywhere else. Just read all the posts by Clarence, look at all the pictures, and pretty much it took some thinking, some concerned thinking to figure out that goes where it goes, and I could be still wrong, but the fact that it serves as a top load of what constitutes the top end of a secondary of a Tesla transformer, according to Donald Smith's implementation of that transformer, and the bottom end goes to earth ground, I think that's accurate. That's the best I can do, but you know, I'm riding on my presumption that I think I'm accurate. So I'm going further now. I'm looking at the bottom end of the secondary of a Tesla coil rather than the top end, because that's what this is partly exhibiting, you know, among other things that are going on in here. And so I can take the liberty maybe of substituting out the grounding rods and putting in a common ground of some kind, just so long as the common ground is massive and magnetizable, ferromagnetizable. Not diamagnetizable, not paramagnetizable, but ferromagnetizable specifically. So it doesn't have to be iron. There are substances nowadays that are far more superior than iron alone. You know, what was available in Tesla's day. And maybe Tesla made use of a particular alloy that he thought was more suitable. Clarence said that these two toroids should be ferrite. So, for simplicity's sake, or commonality's sake, we could say this magnetic keeper, this toroid here, could be made of ferrite for the maximum efficiency. And I don't know if some other ferromagnetizable substance is necessarily any better than what Clarence has suggested. So we'll leave it at ferrite for the moment. I just drew a hollow earth because when you think about it, a hollow earth is a shell, and the shell is quite similar to a toroid, just in 3-dimension instead of 2-dimension. And so what if the hollow earth has a little solid core in the center, which is intrinsic to the functionality of a hollow earth as far as I am concerned? That's my speculative thinking based on studying tornadoes. And of course also the hollow earth stories that date back a little over a century, around a century. They speak of a sun in the center, something in the center. You know, so it's not entirely hollow, but for the most part it's hollow. And the shell of the Earth is equivalent, roughly, in proportionality to the thickness of an eggshell. That's about how thick the shell of the Earth is that we stand on. So I think it's okay to come here in this direction and call the Earth a common ground of an Earth type. It's an earthly common ground, and it's quite massive, and so it satisfies the criteria of something indeterminate in magnetizable saturation ability, so that we can pump lots of energy into it and harvest what's in there due to the characteristics of this, the characteristic dynamics of this circuitry up in here. It's quite a novel circuitry because it's so simple. Despite its simplicity, it still defies explanation from my vantage point. You know, probably somebody else like Clarence could explain it fully, but I sure can't. I get hung up on the disruptive discharge. You know, I think it has something to do with radiant energy. I think I've covered this in my prior videos in groping towards an understanding. And I think the best one is the loss of energy out the neon bulb and the influx of radiant energy of a high frequency, because that's what it's going to lose up there, is standard electromagnetic force of a high frequency. So it's going to gain radiant energy of a high frequency that's going to come into the system and get converted into normal electricity in these three different toroidal situations. And that'll add electrical energy to the system, which you would think, so what, you know, so same amount in is same amount out. Well, maybe not. Maybe when radiant energy gets converted, it's not a one-to-one relationship. Maybe we get a lot more out of it when it converts into, when it's, you know, passed through a magnetic field and then gets converted into electromagnetic energy. I don't know how, you know, I don't know a whole lot about radiant energy. What little I know, I think, is that radiant energy traverses a circuit, every circuit, in the opposite direction to the flow of amperage. And when it passes through a magnetic field, it gets converted into standard electromagnetic force. So that's all I'm going on, plus the fact that a neon bulb is composed of rarefied gases, and Tesla said that rarefied gases act as a kind of transport medium or filter for high-frequency passage through rarefied gas. So in this case, then, I would think that the neon bulb acts as a high-frequency pass filter, basically, allowing energy to leave through the free end of the wire over here, the leg that's not attached to anything, the so-called antenna, or air ground, if, you know, in Clarence's words. But it's also a disruptive discharge, a spark gap, which is going on in here when it lights up. And it's also a surge protector. So there's still a lot of things I don't understand. I have to admit it, because I don't feel confident in looking at this thing and understanding, oh yeah, I get it. No, I don't get it. But I'm willing to go out on a limb and now say that I get this part here. It can't be just any old toroid like these up here. It has to be humongous in mass. And it probably, you know, for instance, to give you an example, the Watts Towers is a huge structure of various metals in LA, in the Watts area of LA, built up gradually over time. And so if you had a very large iron structure, a ferromagnetizable structure, all you would need is one loop to put your windings on to magnetically couple to the entire structure, if the entire structure is magnetically coupled with itself in all of its parts. In other words, it was not made of differing metals other than ferromagnetizable metal, but if it was made exclusively and all the junctions were suitable for transferring magnetic force throughout the entirety of the structure, you could have a massive piece of artwork, you know, to serve as your magnetic keeper down in this area down here, and not worry about the magnetic field in the Earth in that area where you're implementing this circuit. You just make your own magnetic keeper, but it has to be very massive, and we're talking on hundreds and hundreds of pounds of ferromagnetizable iron or material, I should say. Anywho, enough blabbling.